Hey garden friends, today we're going to talk about growing a perennial garden in pots and containers and how you can go about it. Some tips and tricks for you to be successful at it. So let's get rolling. We're going to talk about perennial garden in containers. So how can you do this? Now, this one is kind of a lot about like a cottage garden, cottage perennial garden. That was just what came to mind. I know a lot of people love the cottage garden style and the way it's grown, but this can be adapted to tropical plants, other type plants, even something a little more formal if you preferred. All of that is well and good. So let's start off first. Now, cottage gardens are usually epitomized by overflowing abundance and lush flowers and it's a more of an informal feel, but groupings of certain plants really make you have that cottage garden feel. Now, my garden is definitely cottage garden, but I've been aiming for more of an arts and crafts garden, which combines formal garden with the cottage garden. And it just kind of, adds a little bit more element of control to the what can be messiness of a cottage garden. But we're going to talk about growing it in containers. So first of all, the right containers. Now, it also depends on the right container can depend on what you're going to grow in it. If you want a larger shrub that's perennial to be forever in that container, you're going to have a larger container if you're going to put other plants with it. Or if you want to make a statement, have a statement shrub, kind of like a roses. Now, David Austin roses, their containers that they have 3 of their roses in one container. And in their instructions, when you get your roses to put in your garden, they say to put them 3 feet apart. Well, if you're going to make them together, it's 18 inches apart. So you can imagine with 3 in a pot, it has to be at least a 20-inch pot, if not larger. And so also keep in mind when you are going to grow perennials that in your containers and you want a lot in one container rather than one flower or one specimen, that you will need a larger container to do that. Now, the other way to do it is to put everything in separate containers, have your one large showy plant that gets full and big in a medium-sized container and a bunch of small containers that you can put together. So there's all kinds of things to think about. Now, the benefit of a larger container is that it will retain moisture better than the smaller ones. But if you hook it up to a drip system, that's not a big consideration. But if you're going to hand water, that is something you're going to want to think about. The caveat with that is larger containers are heavy. You will need to be able, if you want to be able to move them, you need to put them on a dolly or have some kind of mechanism that you can move it around. So that comes into the choice of your container, what you want to put in it, how much you want to put in it, if you're going to need to move it. And I think that's all it, the containers. Now, what kind of containers, what kind of materials do you need to think about? I'm going to walk out and we're going to look at some in my garden and then talk a little bit about it. My notes. Now, here is an example of a terracotta pot. I love terracotta. It has such an organic look and feel, and it's, I don't know, it's just something that I enjoy. But I have found there's a problem now with the newer terracotta that I have purchased. This is a very old pot. My grandmother had this like 50 years, and she's been gone now over 20 years. So this is a very old, very well made, well fired. I'm only assuming, talking with people who deal or work in clay, that it's the firing and how they fire it and the actual materials that the terracotta is made from that make it durable outside throughout the year. Now, this one It's not cracked, nothing. And it's been out here for a long time, and it was outside at my grandmother's house forever. It was never taken inside. So I'll share with you one that I have purchased recently and I've had outside only maybe 2 years. And over here, here's another example. Can you see over here? This is a wine half barrel. We live in wine country. Therefore, I have these are readily available to me at a decent price now. I got these for like $12 each. That you won't find that anymore. Now they're at least $25 each, direct from the wineries. And some of them are even in the $30 range. But if you went to at a garden center, I've seen they have them $50 and $60. But these make great big containers for putting a cottage garden in. The mountain chickadees are coming around, getting in my water fountain. All right, I'm going to show you a close-up of my Iris reticulata. I've got to put a cover on these so they don't get smushed by the snow, but they're just gorgeous right now. So yeah, you can see the patch of snow from the last snowstorm, but look at these. Aren't these gorgeous? Now this is a stem. I think that was from a plant, a stock plant that was in here, but look at these. Aren't these absolutely gorgeous? I love these. These are the earliest spring color for me. It's not even spring yet. And look back here. Back here, I have a delphinium coming up that I put in there. Isn't that going to be, that will be gorgeous. But this is the example of a container. And I have, this is probably got the bottom rotten out of it, but I can pack this full of plants in throughout the year, whatever I want to put in it. Sometimes I put the pots, the plants are in a pot already, and I just stick the pots in here to go ahead and continue on. Forgive my ugly orange cans over there. I'm using it to collect rainwater. It's full of rainwater now. I need to, anyways, I use it to water the garden with and or my seedlings because there's nothing better than rainwater for those type of things. So let's go look at the other terracotta pot to show you what I mean about them not holding up as before. Okay, you see this terracotta pot and how it's crumbling around? Yeah, that's some more Iris reticulata that no, wait a minute. Those are mini daffodils. Excuse me. But they're going to be coming up and blooming soon. Hopefully the snow won't hurt them too much. Usually the snow acts as an insulator, but it will also crush them a little bit. But a lot of times they'll spring back up if it's not too late and too heavy. But so that's a demonstration of the terracotta I have purchased recently. So let's talk, I talked about larger pots, but what about the smaller size pots? Now, for your container garden to thrive, they should be at least, especially with perennials, let me make that clear, 12 inches deep and 12 inches wide. Now that's on the smaller scale, but you can grow many things in that size and they will do well as long as they're cared for properly. Now we talked about terracotta, I showed pots and I showed you my wooden barrels. There's also the fiberglass, plastic, and materials like that. They work very well and they come in a lot of finishes. I have tons of plastic pots that are colored like the terracotta. They blend in really well with my other terracotta and they hold up. I've had many of them for decades, so they will hold up too. Now, you know, I love my galvanized containers. I have old buckets and tubs. There's one right in front of me that holds my roses, not distant drum. What's the other one? Coco Loco. Yes. Coco Loco roses, and they've done beautiful in this spot. I have 2 of them in the container. I just have to make sure I give them the right nutrients, etc., to keep them going well, because it is rather a shallow container, and eventually I will need to pot them into larger containers, but that is no big deal. And then I'll find something else to go in this container, and or this is an option that many people aren't aware of. You can trim down the roots. It will keep the plant smaller but healthy, just kind of like they do with bonsai. And then you replant them back in the container, refresh the soil, do all of that good stuff, and they will continue to do well in that container. So galvanized metal is also another option with containers, and it comes in different sizes. There's buckets, there's large wash tubs, There's the bushel basket tubs, lots of them out there. And no, this is one thing I get a question on often. They do not get hot in warmer weather because the soil does not conduct heat. Even if the container is hot to the touch, your plants will do just fine. So all containers, all of your containers, no matter what size, need to have drainage holes. Good drainage is key for all types of perennials or all types of plants, really. Even plants that like moisture conditions, they still need good drainage because good drainage ensures that there's plenty of oxygen in the soil. Oxygen is important. If it sits in water or soil that holds, or a container that doesn't drain, then water will then, not water, but oxygen will become deficient in that and the plant will die. So make sure that all your pots, containers, whatever you're going to plant in has excellent drainage. So if you're going for a cottage garden look in your containers, your perennials in your containers, then you're going to want to make sure you have the layered look, meaning taller plants, medium-sized plants, and shorter plants. Now, what helps with the layered look is the size of your containers. You can have the taller containers, kind of like my barrels, then a pot that's a little bit shorter with other plants, and then shorter. But also you can do it with the plants. You can have all the same size pots, but you would have taller plants in the back. Now let's talk about cottage perennials, rather like delphiniums and what else is really tall? Foxgloves. Now foxgloves and delphiniums are also in the biennial group, but you can buy perennial versions of them, or they can act like perennials in your garden. But if you have containers that you're going to just walk by one side of, then you're going to want the tall plants to the back, and then the medium-sized plants in the middle, and the shorter plants in front. That just makes sense. That's the same with a garden bed or a perennial border. You want to be able to see all your plants. Now, okay, I've got to break in here. I forgot to continue this thought with, if your container garden is in an area that you're going to walk around it, not just by one side of it, you will need to have the taller plants in the center, then the medium plants, the next one out, like say you're layering. So big plants or big pots, then the medium shorter pots, and then the short pots. And then it's like it's called an island bed if you're planting it out in the garden, but this would be an island container garden. That way you can see all of the plants from all the way around. Now this works not only with like cottage flowers, cottage perennials, but it also works for like tropicals. I have grown elephant ears in containers, my bamboo, I have banana plants, all kinds of perennial looking tetrapanics. That one I really love. I did lose mine. I'll have to buy another. And then maybe I need to learn how to take cuttings from that because I have a tough time overwintering it. What was it? There's another one that's a Japanese. I'll look at the name later, but it also has a tropical feel to me. I have cannas, whatever. So you can do this planting scheme with perennials that are not necessarily a cottage look, or you can go with a more formal feel. Like some of the plants in front could be boxwood that you've trimmed into topiaries or little balls or little squares, whatever you want that's evergreen and will provide that more structured look. You can put up trellises in the back of the larger pots and have vines growing up them to give you the height you want. There's so many ways you can go. Now I was talking about perennials with these. Many of the vines you can buy are perennial, but you can also do it with annuals that are fast growing. So I shouldn't really limit this video to perennials, but it seems like that's what I've been getting asked about. So that's why I was kind of focusing on perennial flowers over the annuals for your container garden. Now there's also shade-loving plants or part shade-loving plants that you can do the same technique with. Taller in the back, medium in the foreground a little bit more, and then the smaller ones are ground covers in the smaller or the very forefront as like an edging or something. And there's no limit to what you can do. Now, how do you care for perennials in containers? That's a great, great question. Now, one thing I missed that I'm going to go back to is variegated foliage is just as pretty as flowers in your containers. You can also do vegetables. And yeah, things like coleus or hostas or anything that has pretty foliage, or even some herbs. I have a golden sage. It's really beautiful, the foliage. Lavenders, herb, it's limitless. So how do you take care of things? That's what we were going to go on to. Now, first of all, when you're planting up your containers, you want to use a good quality potting mix. I make my own from a turkey compost from a local organic farm, turkey farm, and a little bit of perlite and or rice hulls. That's the chaff from rice when they collect it or they take it off of when you eat rice, it doesn't have the chaff on it. And that hull is what they take off of it. And that's spelled Hulls. It's sold at feed stores as a animal bedding. I use it in my chicken pen and chicken house. It is excellent. It also helps to increase drainage in your containers or in your soil. So that works, and it's sustainable. So a lot of times, yeah, perlite. And now in things for succulents, I will, like the top 3 or 4 inches, I'll have it mixed in with some horticultural sand or some builder sand, some rough sand, not the play sand you get for kids, that's too fine, but coarse sand is what I was trying to talk about. So that is for the different things, but you want it to be a good quality because it's going to be in that container a long time. And you want it to be able to be the right mixture of soil retention as well as drainage. So that is one thing. Now there's a lot of good quality potting soils out there. I prefer anything that does not have, not anything, I should say, potting soils that do not have the synthetic fertilizers in it. I try to go all organic with everything, and I have found that works much better for me. And also the potting soils that don't have the peat moss in the containers that I have grown in the past, when they become solid brick, that's the soil in them, it's because of the peat moss compresses. And then it becomes hydrophobic where it will not absorb water anymore. And then your plants will suffer. So that's just another thing. And that's just been my experience with it. So with perennials in containers, you also want to provide nutrients because the frequent watering can wash away or wash out nutrients quicker than if it's in the ground. And also when it's in the ground, there's all the kinds of microbes, etc., that are creating food constantly, the worms for the plants, and you're not getting that in a container. So you are in control of the nutrient content and what they will get. So you need to be on top of that. I prefer an organic liquid fertilizer. I avoid slow release fertilizers for the most part because many of them are coated with a polymer that's what makes them slow release. But that polymer is a microplastic and it adds microplastics to your soil, and I just want to avoid that. The Espoma organic products, they do not have that, the polymer, but also they're not readily available for me and they're very expensive. So I just go with the liquid fertilizer and work with that. Just fine. One size fits all too. You don't have to have a rose fertilizer, a succulent fertilizer. You don't need all the different fertilizers. And I have a blog post and video on that, and I'll link it below. So in the winter, what about perennials that you have in containers that aren't hardy in your zone? Or let me explain this differently. With perennials, let's say a rose, just for example. A rose will be hardy down to zone, say 7. Example, they're hardy or much lower. But if you're a zone 7 and you have it in a container, it isn't necessarily hardy, because if it is in a container, it needs to be hardy down to 2 zones lower than the one you're located in. So that means it would have to be hardy down to zone 5. And that's because it doesn't have the insulation around it of the soil everywhere. It is in a container, which the cold penetrates more. So that way you would have to protect that plant by putting it in an unheated garage or up against your house. With my containers that have perennials that are close to my zone or lower, I put them up against the house, and I'll put hardier perennials in containers along outside of it, and that helps to insulate the one that's closer to the house. Of course, all homes will release some heat. Some, like brick and stone homes, the stone will absorb sunlight and radiate heat at night. That helps to protect them. And or I put some of mine into my greenhouses. So that is, you're going to be mindful of that when you have perennials in containers. How hardy are they in your zone or lower? But there's, all, like I said, ways of insulating them. And also I use burlap, like coffee sacks. We have a coffee shop that sells them. You could wrap those around the container, and that helps too. So just be mindful of that when you're growing perennials in containers. So what are some planting tips for planting perennials in containers? Well, you want to layer your plants, of course, the different heights, but also you want to make sure you leave space. And because perennials will start out smaller, but then over the years they'll grow larger, and you want them to have the space to be their healthiest. Now, if you want it to be fuller looking until those perennials fill in, and sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years, depending on the perennial, then you can plop a pot, say, into a pot into a pot. So let's say this is perennials planted in here, and they haven't come up yet, so it's too early for these particular perennials. Well, you have a pot, you can buy up annuals or start annuals from seed or what have you, and you can put them in that container. Let me do one that's got some flowers on it. This is a geranium, perfect example. And then you have some color in that container of perennials until your perennials come up. That works whether you're wanting to fill in to make it lusher looking, or if you want to, or if those are later blooming perennials and you want instant color. So you could also layer with spring bulbs in your container, and then they'll come up. But then there's also those perennials that will come up later, and once the tulips, etc., are fading away, then the others will take over the show. Now, I have a video on 17 perennials to plant for early spring color. That will be really work here, so you could start with those. And then there's another one for 26, I think it's 26, perennials for all summer color, meaning it starts in early summer and they bloom all the way through the fall. You can refer back to those 4 plants and how they will perform. Now, always remember when I am doing a video like that, that I am relating flowers that do well in my conditions, not just my zone, my local conditions. There's some flowers that I grow and they thrive for me that may not for you, because you may have higher humidity than me, or your nights stay hotter, or there's all kinds of conditions. Now, if you have a local nursery that's family run and has knowledgeable staff, then they can relate to you what perennials thrive in your area and will work better for you than maybe some that I would recommend here. So always go with what works for your area the best. So how do you keep or try to retain moisture in your containers? Because they dry out faster being containers. Well, you can mulch, but also I have a whole video on ground covers that you could use to replace mulch, and that works in containers as well. And that holds the moisture in, as well as it brings some beauty to the container. Now, I will have a little caveat here. I had planted lamium with some other perennials in a container. That lamium wanted to take over. So what I do now is I will plant it inside of a pot. I will sink the pot into the container with the other perennials, and this will help to contain that lamium in this little section instead of the underground runners and rhizomes running along. The same works with creeping jenny, which can be very vigorous, and other things, perennial ground covers that may become bullies in your containers. So it's an easy way to tame them, but still get the beauty from them. So, and as they creep along the top of the soil, then they cover the soil and help retain that moisture. But they don't always have to root in there. And they're very easy if the runners or the stems root, they're very easy to pull back and prevent them from running over everything else. So with the perennials in your containers, you will need to deadhead them, of course, to keep many of them blooming. That goes for a wide range of perennials. Most of them do need deadheading to keep them blooming. You know, I have, like I said, that blog, or not, yeah, I have a blog post, but video on the 26 long blooming perennials, that all of those will work in containers. But yeah, deadheading is one of the main ways you can keep them going, keep them blooming. You can also do what's called, it's a new trend, and I was going to do, I'm going to do a video on it. And it's called green drenching. And it's a whole field unto itself, or a design unto itself, which to me, in my mind, it rather reminds me of what I call Zen gardening, where it's a lot of foliage, a lot of different greens and the textures and all of that. So that's something that I'm working on, and there's an area I want to create that. And yeah, and it really would work great for shady areas, especially. It just brings that, to me, that quiet, calm, less chaotic vibe to an area. I'm also working on, which this could be done in a container as well, is a section of my entrance garden, I'm going goth, the goth garden. And this is dark plants with blacks and deep purples and magentas so dark that they look almost a brown. And I'm having fun with trying to use plants that I have to do that. I'm digging them up, transplanting them. I just took cuttings, this is dripping, of my black lace elderberry to start. And I'll do a video on that, on how to do that. But yeah, I'm digging up my black mondo grass to put there. So yeah, really a lot of neat things going on. And there's also so many trends that you could do, you could incorporate in this container garden scheme you have. So go ahead, gather up some pots. I had seen a bunch of really inexpensive pots at Dollar Tree. The ones I bought at Dollar General, which are probably the same quality as Dollar Tree, they didn't hold up a long time. I had to be really careful because they became brittle very easily outside, and then they would break in subsequent years, and that made them more throwaway. So if you can, try to buy a little bit higher quality. Go to thrift stores, go to yard sales and garage sales. You will find containers. Maybe somebody's cleaning out their grandma's garden. Maybe she's no longer around and they're wanting to get rid of her garden stuff. You can find some really beautiful things. You can find statuary, other garden decor. You can incorporate that in your perennial container garden as well. All sorts of beautiful things that you can do, and you just let your imagination run wild. Get inspirational photographs off of the web, Pinterest, whatever, and try to create your own beautiful container garden in your small space. Also, don't forget, and I may have mentioned it already, but I've talked so much, vegetables. You can do vegetables in containers as well. I have a few videos of small containers I've done it in. This summer, I'm planning on doing a whole container garden on my back deck. Someone gave me these self-watering huge containers, and I'm going to make use of them. And I'm going to see how well I can grow a container garden on my back deck. I'm going to go with the dwarf varieties of vegetables and see how that works out for me and what kind of flavors I get. So I will take you along on that journey as well. So I hope you found this video encouraging and inspiring, and you will go out and plant yourself a perennial container garden this year. So I'll see you in my next video.